Hello everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, PrEP Performance Measures, Structure, Cost, and Support. Before we begin, we'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your audience console are multiple application widgets you can use. You can expand each widget by clicking on the Maximize icon at the top right of the widget or dragging the bottom right corner of the widget panel. If you have any questions for presenters during the webcast, you can click on the Q&A widget at the bottom and submit your question. We'll address as many questions as possible during the session. But for more detailed answers required or run out of time, the questions will be answered later via email. We do capture all questions. If you have any technical difficulties, please click on the Help widget. There's a question mark icon and covers common technical issues. However, you can submit technical questions through the Q&A widget. Most technical issues can be resolved by pressing F5 or Command R using Macs. It will refresh your console. A copy of today's slide deck is located in the Resource List widget. It's indicated by a green file icon at the bottom of your screen. Finally, an on-demand version of this webcast will be available approximately 1 day after the webcast. It can be accessed using the same audience link used today. Now I'd like to introduce Laura Hulsey. Laura, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Brian. I'm Laura Hulsey with Mathematica, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the second in a series of webinars on the revised PrEP performance measures. Last month, we discussed measures of attendance, reach, and dosage, and today we will focus on measures of structure, cost, and support for program implementation. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce Jessica Johnson of FISB. Jessica, would you like to say a few words?
Sure, Laura, thanks. So on behalf of FISB and the Adolescent Pregnancy Prevention Program, I would just like to thank you for attending this webinar. Thank you for continuing, some of you for years, to collect this performance measure data. Particularly this data that we're going to discuss in today's webinar, the structure, costs, and implementation measures, are really vital for the program for us to explain what's needed to implement the PrEP programs, what resources and support you need, and also to give us a picture of how you implement the programs. And then last, of course, we're able to see variation across all of our PrEP grantees on how it's implemented. And so I just wanted to echo that the information that's being reviewed and that you're collecting is vital and useful to us as a program.
Thank you, Jessica. And Mindy Scott of Child Trends will now walk us through the revised performance measures. Mindy?
Thanks, Laura, and good afternoon, everybody. I want to first review the objectives for today's webinar. First, we will provide an overview of the PrEP performance measures plan, including some updates to the measures that are new for the next round of data collection and submission. We'll then describe the performance measures related to structure, cost, and support for program implementation. And we'll review requirements and the timeline for submitting the set of measures. We will also review optional tools that have been developed to help grantees compile and aggregate the measures of structure, cost, and support. And finally, we'll have plenty of time to address any questions that you have about collecting and submitting these measures. So let's get started with an overview of the PrEP performance measures. These measures will provide information that can be used in a number of important ways. First, the PrEP performance measures help to document the extent to which the objectives of the PrEP initiative are being met and contribute to lessons learned from this type of initiative where the emphasis is on the replication and scale-up of evidence-based programs. The performance measures can also help to create a foundation for program improvement efforts. For example, FISB may develop some general technical assistance strategies that focus on common implementation challenges that are reported frequently across many grantees. However, FISB also hopes that individual grantees are using the performance measures as a tool to identify areas and strategies for their own program improvement purposes. And finally, the performance measures will be used to report information about the PrEP programs to policymakers and legislators. The PrEP performance measures are organized around 3 categories: measures of structure, cost, and support for program implementation, which we'll focus in more detail on today, measures of attendance, reach, and dosage, which we reviewed during the webinar in December. And a third category that consists of measures of participating youth characteristics, their experiences in the program, and their perceptions of the effects of the programs. In past years, grantees submitted performance measures from all three of these categories. However, FISB wants to remind grantees, particularly those that are continuing grantees that are familiar with the original full set of performance measures, that there are updates to the measures and to requirements for which measures will be required for submission for the 2017-2018 reporting period. Let me just run through some of those updates. FISB has obtained approval for a revised set of measures of attendance, reach, and dosage. Again, those are the measures that we reviewed during last month's webinar on that topic. FISB has also obtained approval for a revised set of measures of structure, costs, and support for program implementation, and we'll review those measures today. These measures will first be reported in August 2018 and will reflect a full grant year from October 2017 through September 2018, and these measures can be reported retrospectively for that full period. And I'll point out exactly which measures are new as we review the full set of measures today. The measures of youth characteristics, program experiences, and perceptions of program effects, which are drawn from youth entry and exit surveys, have not been approved, and grantees are not required to collect or submit youth entry and exit survey data for the August 2018 data submission. You may choose to use those surveys for your own local evaluation purposes, and that's totally fine. FISB has asked that you remove the cover page from the surveys. That's the front page that has FISB logos and the OMB number, so just remove that before using the surveys for your own purposes. The PREP performance measures originate from various levels. Each PREP grantee reports data to ACYF and FISB, and these data are based on information about the grantee themselves, as well as information about each program that is being delivered. And some grantees may serve as their own providers if they are directly providing program services to youth rather than allocating resources to a partner organization to deliver the program. And that's shown in the first example here, where the grantee is directly providing program model A. We also know that some grantees are delivering more than one program model, and that's shown in the middle grantee structure. However, many grantees have partnered with other organizations who are responsible for providing PREP services directly to youth, and that is shown in the third example in this chart. And these organizations who are directly serving youth are referred to as providers. So now let's focus in a bit more detail on the PREP performance measures of structure, costs, and support for program implementation. These measures are drawn from the grantee, provider, and program model levels. We'll look at measures related to funding, staffing, and training at the grantee and provider levels, along with additional measures of implementation challenges and needs for technical assistance that are collected at the provider level, Then at the program model level, the performance measures address program delivery, target populations, and adulthood preparation subjects. And we'll go into more detail about all of the measures under each of these categories in the next slides. We'll begin with information reported at the grantee level. This information focuses on the structure and cost of the PREP programs and the supports that are necessary for implementing the PREP programs. And in particular, FISB is interested in information in three specific areas: PREP funding, grantee staffing and training, technical assistance, and monitoring. For PREP funding, grantees will be asked to report the total amount of PREP grant funding obligated during the specific reporting period. So, for example, in August 2018, when you report these measures, you will be asked to report the total dollar amount of PREP grant funds allocated for the October 2017 through September 2018 federal grant year. And this is actually one of the original PREP performance measures. It has not been reported recently, but FISB is asking grantees to resume reporting this measure, starting with the next round of data submission in August 2018. ACF has also added a new performance measure related to funding for the next round of data submission. Grantees will report the percentage of total PREP grant funding obligated for various activities. And these activities include direct service provision, or in other words, the programming that is provided directly to youth, training, technical assistance, and monitoring conducted at the grantee level, evaluation and research activities, and grantee-level administrative activities. These data related to PREP funding will be used to understand how grant resources are allocated and to understand decisions that are made about programming and funding for grantees. Grantee-level staffing data focus on the number of staff. Information will be collected on the total number of staff and also the number of staff full-time equivalents. So staff at this is the total number of staff at the grantee level who are directly responsible for overseeing and administering PREP programming. So first you will provide a count of all staff who are directly responsible for oversight of the PREP program. And examples of these staff could include PREP program directors or program coordinators. And you would count these positions even if the person filling that position does not support PREP full-time. Next, you will need to provide a count of full-time equivalents, or FTEs, for staff who are responsible for overseeing and administering PREP. And kind of to walk you through how to get this information, to calculate this measure, you would divide the number of hours a staff member allocates to PREP by the total amount of hours in a work week. So as an example, if you have a 40-hour work week and a staff member devotes 20 hours a week to PREP, they should be considered half of an FTE, or 0.5 FTE, or full-time equivalent. And when you report your data for this question, you will sum across all PREP staff. So if a PREP program director and a program coordinator each devote 0.5 FTE to the project, you would report a total of 1 full-time equivalent, or 1 FTE. And ultimately, this information on grantee-level staffing will help us obtain an accurate summary of the staffing that is necessary to administer the PREP programs. The next type of data to be collected at the grantee level focuses on training, technical assistance, and monitoring. And there are 3 specific areas addressed by these data. First, you will report whether the grantee or any subcontractors or partners who operate on behalf of the grantee observed program delivery to monitor quality and fidelity to the program models. If you answer yes to this initial question, a new measure has been added to get more information about who is conducting these observations. You will now report on the types of organizations that conducted observations of quality and fidelity. And the response options for these types of organizations include the grantee themselves, developers, training or technical assistance partners, evaluation partners, or program providers. And a note here, if more than one organization is conducting observations, you can mark all that apply to capture all of the different organizations that are conducting observations for you. You will also report whether the PREP grantee or a subcontractor or other partner provided technical assistance to support PREP program implementation. And again, if you answer yes to this question, you will be asked to report on the types of organizations that provided the technical assistance. And the categories, again, they're listed on the slide here, and they're the same as those we just reviewed for the question about who conducted observations. So grantees, developers, training or technical assistance partners, evaluation partners, or program providers. And finally, you will report whether the grantee or any partners provided training for facilitators, either by training prep facilitators directly on core programming or training staff who then train the facilitators. And this is also known as turnkey training or train the trainer. And you will again report the types of organizations that provided the training. Across these different measures, the information will be used to understand the mix of training, technical assistance, and monitoring activities conducted at the grantee level. However, I do want to point out that there is nothing judgmental or punitive in these measures. FISB is simply trying to determine which grantees, if any, are undertaking these types of activities and the organizations and partners responsible for carrying out those activities. Okay, so that covers the grantee level data that will be reported. So I want to now focus on provider data. A provider can be thought of as an organization or agency that provides core prep programming directly to youth. And some examples of this could include nonprofit organizations and various local or state government agencies that are directly responsible for administering the prep-funded programs. Grantees, as we mentioned, may serve as providers themselves if they are directly serving youth, and in some cases they may be the only provider. Other grantees have multiple providers, whether it's themselves and another organization or multiple provider organizations beyond the grantee. For each of these providers, you will submit performance measures on funding and whether the provider implemented programming for youth during the reporting period. Then, for providers who did serve youth during that reporting period, you will report some additional information. You will report data on staffing and training and implementation challenges and needs for technical assistance. Let's first discuss the funding measures at the provider level. You will report whether the provider first received PREP funding during the reporting period. You will also provide information on the total dollar amount awarded to the provider for PREP grant activities during the reporting period, and the amount of any additional non-PREP funding received to support PREP programming. Taken together, these data will be used to understand the mix of funding sources for the PREP programs. Measures of provider staffing and training consist of the total number of PREP facilitators who worked for a provider to deliver PREP programming to youth, and among these facilitators, the number that were trained and observed. For measures related to training, you will first report the total number of PREP facilitators who have been trained to deliver the program. You will also report on how many of those facilitators were observed once or twice or more. That is, among the total number of PREP program facilitators who provided programming to youth during the federal grant year, you will indicate the number who were observed exactly one time during the period and the number that were observed 2 or more times during that reporting period. Now, for this measure, information about the person or organization who conducted the observations is not needed. We simply want to know whether the facilitators were observed. So, for example, observations could be conducted by program staff or provider or grantee staff or program developer. You don't need to report who is conducting those observations for this measure. And this information will be used to understand the total number of facilitators used to deliver PREP programming for each provider and to gain a better understanding of the extent to which facilitators are trained and observed. The last set of measures collected at the provider level focus on implementation challenges and needs for technical assistance. Let's first look at the measure of implementation challenges. You'll be provided with a list of potential implementation challenges, and we'll see this list during the demonstration of the optional recording tools for these measures, which will come next. So for each of these implementation potential challenges, you'll be asked to indicate the extent to which each possible challenge was a problem for providers during the 2017-2018 federal grant year. Response options will include not a problem, somewhat a problem, or a serious problem. You will also indicate the extent to which providers would like to receive technical assistance for each identified implementation factor. And for this measure, response categories will include not interested, somewhat interested, or very interested. And as an example, for these measures, you could indicate that recruiting youth was a serious problem for a provider, and they are very interested in receiving technical assistance in that area. This information will be used to understand the most common challenges experienced across providers, as well as areas of greatest need for technical assistance. And again, I want to just reiterate that this information will not be used for any punitive purposes. FISBE is simply trying to understand the real challenges that are faced by providers when implementing the PREP programs and where providers could benefit the most from technical assistance. The third and last level of data that will be reported is at the program model level. A PREP program model includes the core curriculum plus any other lessons or activities that have been integrated with the core curriculum to meet PREP funding objectives, for example, to address adulthood preparation subjects. It is possible that grantees are implementing the same program model in more than one setting, such as schools and community centers. In these cases, you would identify only one program model and report measures across all settings. It is also possible that grantees, or their providers, I should mention, will be implementing multiple program models within the same setting or even across different settings. And in those cases, you would identify each distinct program model. And you'll be asked to provide information about the structure of each of those program models being implemented. The measures being reported at the program model level include information about the intended program delivery hours, the different types of populations that are targeted by each program model, the adult preparation topics that are covered, and a new measure on the source of those adulthood preparation subjects, the curriculum content for those adulthood preparation subjects. So let's talk about program delivery first. For program delivery, you will report the total number of intended program hours that are expected to be provided to youth for one complete delivery of each program model. For example, if a program is intended to last 16 hours and it will be delivered 4 times during the federal grant year, you would report 16 hours for this measure. So that's the intended hours of delivery for that program. Do not report the actual numbers delivered if it differs from the intended hours. For this, we want to just first know the intended hours for delivery. And keep in mind that the total number of program hours should include the hours for your core curriculum, plus any supplemental lessons that may have been added, such as lessons to address the adulthood preparation subjects. And this information will help FISBE understand the intended dosage for each program model. Grantees will also be asked to provide information about target populations of participants. You will be asked whether each program model targets specific populations of youth, and you'll see a complete list of these key target populations also later in the webinar during the demonstration of the optional data recording tools. And you'll indicate for this measure which, if any, of the populations are distinctly targeted and recruited for the PrEP program, even if those youth were not actually served. For example, if youth in foster care were targeted but not actually served, you would still indicate that youth in foster care were targeted. And these data will help to understand the primary groups of youth who are being targeted by each program model under PrEP. And last, the final information about the structure of PrEP program models to be reported in August 2018 relates to the adulthood preparation subjects that are being implemented. You will first indicate all adulthood preparation subjects that are covered by the program model, either as part of the core curriculum or through supplemental lessons. And FISBE will use this information to better understand which adulthood preparation subjects are being covered by each program model. A new measure has been added that provides a bit more information about the source of the adulthood preparation subjects content that is being delivered. For each of the subjects that are covered by the PrEP program, you will indicate the source for that content. For example, the adulthood preparation subjects could be included in the program's core evidence-based or evidence-informed adolescent pregnancy prevention curriculum, or the content could be covered by incorporating an entirely additional existing curriculum, covered by adding selected lessons from another existing curriculum rather than the full curriculum, or covered by original content that you as the grantee or a partner organization created. If a subject is covered in more than one way in your program, you can indicate all that apply across these response categories. And the information from this data will be used to understand different sources of the adulthood preparation subjects' curricular content. So that just gives you a brief background on the performance measures related to program structure, cost, and support for implementation and their uses. So I want to next review the timeline for collecting and submitting these measures. Grantees will first submit measures of structure, cost, and support for the 2017-2018 federal grant year in August 2018. And again, these measures should reflect the structure, cost, and support for implementation of the PrEP programs that occurred between October 2017 and September 2018. And you should have all of the information that you need to report this set of measures in August, but it should reflect the full federal grant year that ends in September. Also, I do want to note that this schedule does differ from the data collection period for the measures of attendance, reach, and dosage that we reviewed in December. And just as a reminder, those measures will be reported for programming that occurs between January 1st, 2018 and July 31st, 2018 for the 2017-2018 reporting period. And then after that, data will be submitted for August 1st through July 31st for future reporting periods. And this August through July time period is used for measures of attendance, reach, and dosage in order to maximize the number of completed cohorts that can be reported each period, since those measures are based on cohorts of participating youth. And this is really designed to maximize the number of cohorts, given that much of the PrEP programs are implemented in schools with programming that typically runs August through September through June or July. So most cohorts will be completed in that time period. The measures of structure, cost, and support, going back to this set of measures, will next be submitted so in August 2018, and then the same measures will be submitted the following summer and every summer thereafter, just updated for the particular federal grant year. So as an example, for August 2019, all measures that were first submitted in August 2018 will be submitted again, but they will correspond to the 2018-2019 federal grant year, so October 2018 through September 2019. And I know some of these details about the timelines is a little tricky, so definitely ask questions and we can talk about it and kind of review the timeline a bit more if there are still questions. I'm going to just conclude this part of the webinar by quickly summarizing the changes to the measures of structure, cost, and support for program implementation. And we have a summary table here on this slide that's up. And this table can also be found in a guidance document that has been developed to help summarize all of the substantive changes to the PREP performance measures. And that guidance document is posted on the prepeval.com website, along with other guidance documents that are available for collecting and reporting the PREP performance measures. And we'll provide that website a few times throughout the webinar. So just as a quick reminder, the grantee level measures that are new focus on the percentage of grant funding that's obligated for various categories of spending during the last federal grant year, and the types of organizations that conducted observations, conducted trainings, or provided technical assistance to program providers among the grantees that report that they conducted those activities. And then finally, a new program level measure captures additional information on the sources of content used for each adulthood preparation subject covered by the programs. So let's pause here before we move on to the demonstration of the optional data recording tools to answer any questions that you may have at this time.
Thank you, Mindy. We have several questions, and we'll go through them, and I will ask the questions and then direct them mostly to Mindy for answers. We have a question asking about the definition of a provider, and in particular, one attendee is interested in knowing whether that means the same thing as an implementation site.
So for the purposes of the reporting the performance measures, a provider is an organization that is directly providing the PREP program to youth. I think a provider could be implementing in multiple settings, so I think there is a distinction between the organization actually providing the program to youth and sort of where the program is being delivered, and that there could be multiple implementation sites under one provider. And if there are more detailed questions on it, I think for some of these, it is probably best to kind of check in with the performance measures team individually, so we can help answer those kinds of questions as specifically as possible for your situation.
Thanks, Mindy. And we have a couple of questions on technical assistance and training. I'm gonna give you two at once because I think that the responses might be related. First, it's quite simply, can you define what we have in mind by technical assistance? And then regarding training, it's a similar question, but getting into a couple of more specifics. Are the trainings only training on curricula, or would other types of training also be included?
For these measures, it's sort of any activities the grantee or a partner or subcontractor is providing to support the PREP program. So technical assistance could be quite broad on a number of topics, and training as well could be quite broad, sort of depending on the activities that each grantee is implementing.
Sorry, I had myself muted. And just to follow up on that, if there's a particular activity that you're not sure whether to count or not, feel free to email the PrepEval website. The PrepEval website has the email address that you can use, and we'll give that at the very end of the talk. But certainly, we're happy to answer questions on a case-by-case basis. Regarding technical assistance, another point that might be helpful, when we get to the tools documents, you'll see that the questions about technical assistance needs lists quite a few examples of types of technical assistance. We now have a couple of questions regarding the funding, specifically about non-prep grant funding. So this will be, I guess, related to slide 21. One specific one asking if a site has school implementation partners that receive prep funding in 1 year, but then after that are funded entirely by the school partners, is that information intended to be included as non-prep funding?
And that would get reported if that funding was provided during the federal grant year that you're reporting on. So if that non-prep funding was allocated for prep programming for October 2018 through September, then you would want to report that. So thinking about when that funding was allocated.
Thank you. And another question about the funding and what's included in non-prep is asking whether the 35% local match that their subawardees, providers, are required to provide would be included in this non-prep funding.
Yes, and I think if thinking about other sources of funding that's being used to help implement your prep programming, so that is a good example, I think, to share as a source of non-prep funding, and also sort of a good example that grantees may have a lot of different types of funding sources to kind of think through, and we are happy to help specify some of those examples as you're compiling your measures.
Hi, and this is Jessica. I would also like to add that none of the prep grantees are required to have a match to either us or their grantees, and so that sounds like a question specific to that grantee, but I just want to be clear that our grantees are not required to have a match.
Thank you, Jessica. Staying with the funding theme, there is a grantee whose subawardee contracts run for a different period than the reporting period. They run from June 1st through May 31st. And they're asking if they should compute the amount that matches the reporting period for performance measures. So should they compute it to align with the October through September period?
And I would recommend for the most accurate reporting, and so that FSBE has the best sense of the dollars allocated for that time period to the best of your ability and kind of the extent possible to be able to report the dollars for that particular period would be most helpful for FSBE and understanding the funding for prep programming during each grant period, federal grant year.
Thank you, Mindy. All right. Going back to a couple of questions that came in earlier, someone asked, what if there is a range of hours for the intended delivery? So imagine in their example, there are 12 program components, each of which could last from 30 minutes to an hour. So the intended hours of programming is a range from 6 to 12. What would they enter in as their intended programming hours?
Our recommendation for that would be to report the total possible number of hours. And so even if some of the implementation delivery cohort, if some of the delivery is completed earlier for that program model, you would want to capture the total number of possible hours intended.
Thank you. We have a few questions, as you expected, about the reporting period. One of them is asking us to clarify the fact that the reporting period runs through September, but the performance measure submission occurs in August. Can we clarify that and explain?
Yeah, so for this set of measures, we do want to capture the full federal grant year, but because reporting is in August, it's a little bit early before that is the full grant year is completed, but it is our sense that this information about the funding for the year, the number of facilitators, whether training and technical assistance and observations are occurring, you can really have a full picture of the year, even in August, even if there's another month left, because a lot of the information is retrospective and sort of available to you without needing to collect new information throughout the federal grant year.
There's also a question asking about whether the approval for the entry and exit surveys is expected during this grant year. And I'm not entirely sure what this grant year means, but if the measures that we're talking about now, we've been focusing on what will be reported in August of 2018, and it is not expected that the entry and exit surveys measures would be approved in time for any of that data to be included in this summer's reporting. I think the hope is that they would be improved in time for them to begin to be collected and reported in the following year's reporting period. All right, I'm just looking through several of these. I think are repeats of other questions. We have a question of, if the grantee is the only provider, do they enter provider-level information about themselves?
And yes, I think that's a great question to kind of clarify the expectation that if the grantee is the single provider, you would report information for the grantee as the provider. Yes.
There's a question about whether there will be an online data collection for this new report. And we will again be using the same performance measures reporting system that has been used in the past, but with revisions to align with the revisions to these measures. So grantees who know the PMS system, you'll log into the PMS system the same way that you're used to, but the questions will be a little bit different. There will also be Excel tools, which we will talk about in just a couple of minutes, which similarly will have been updated to match the revised measures. And with that as a segue, we're about halfway through our time, and so I think we're going to turn to looking over those tools. There are a few unanswered questions remaining, which we might come back to at the end. We will have another Q&A session at the end of the demo of the tools. So I'll turn it to Kevin.
Thanks, Laura. I'm Kevin Kelly, and I help run the PMAPS help desk. So any inquiries that come in through our email address or phone line, I will often be the person responding to those. So as Laura mentioned, today I'm going to discuss the optional data recording tools for these measures. And then I'll demonstrate how the tools can be used. The first thing I want to stress is that the tools are indeed optional. They're for your use if you feel they provide value to you. I'll demonstrate how they can be used, but the general gist is that these tools can provide a simple way to track and summarize data, and they serve as a reference to help you easily enter and submit your data through the Performance Measures Management System, which, as Mindy discussed, will occur in August 2018. So if you have your own systems or processes in place that would enable you to track the required information, you can absolutely continue to use those procedures and forego the Excel tools entirely. They're not by any means mandated and will never be required to be submitted to ACF, but they have been created as a way to simplify performance measures reporting come the end of the reporting period. The optional tools I will be discussing and demonstrating today assist with tracking data on the measures of structure, cost, and support. The tools are available for download at www.prepeval.com, which we'll put that website URL up on the screen later on in today's session. If you've been a grantee in the past and you've used these tools, you'll note that the structure of these tools differ than the structure of the structure, cost, and support tools from previous reporting periods. We've adjusted the tools to align well with the three-level structure of data that these measures take on. Remember that there are three levels of data for the August 2018 data submission for the measures of structure, cost, and support. There's measures at the grantee level, such as prep funding and grantee staff, measures at the provider level, such as staffing and training of facilitators, as well as implementation challenges and needs for technical assistance, and measures at the program model level, such as target populations and measures related to the adulthood preparation subjects. The two optional data recording tools that we have created are organized to align with these three different levels of data. Grantees are ultimately the agencies responsible for submitting the performance measures and have discretion as to who might be best suited to collect data and how those data should be collected. If the grantee decides to use the optional Excel tools, the grantee will need to decide who should collect and enter the data into the tools. For grantees with multiple providers, it may be useful to have providers complete their own versions of the tool. As I mentioned, there are two Excel spreadsheets that could be of use. In a moment, I'll demonstrate each of them. The first we'll discuss is a tool to help summarize grantee-level measures of structure, cost, and support needed for submission, including how the grantee allocates prep funds, grantee staffing levels, observation, training, and technical assistance provided, and the list of providers. The other tool I will demonstrate has both the provider and program level measures together in one workbook. If using the optional Excel tools, each provider under a given grantee would have one provider level workbook and would include information for each of the programs they implement. To use the data recording tools, download the tools from www.prepeval.com, open and review the Instructions tab, navigate to and enter data into the data entry worksheets, and save your work. Then, when it's time to report the measures, your structure, cost, and support performance measures data will be together so you can easily enter and submit the information through the Performance Measures Management System once it's open in August 2018. We're about to turn to demonstrating the actual data recording tools. It may take a moment for your browser to update so that you're viewing the Excel tools rather than the slides. If the spreadsheet isn't visible, please first try to refresh your screen. And if you're still running into issues, you can download the spreadsheets at www.prepeval.com, which that link is shown here on the screen. You can open them and follow along as I discuss the tools. I'll pause for a moment so everyone can have that link jotted down handy. All right, I'll now turn to actually demonstrating the data recording tools. I'm going to start with the grantee level tool, and then we'll demonstrate the provider and program level tool. All right, the grantee level tool should be loading. So you can see on the screen that the first tab of the Excel workbook for the grantee level measures of structure, cost, and support. As you can see, this is an Instructions tab that gives an overview of the tool, a brief description of how to enter the information, and the email address and phone line for the Prep Performance Measures Help Desk, which we can help you with any questions you have or issues you encounter while entering data into the tools. I'll now turn to the other tab on the spreadsheet called Structure, Cost, and Support by clicking it at the bottom of the screen. Each grantee that chooses to use the Excel tool will only need one grantee level Excel tool. The first thing I'll do is enter the grantee name, which we'll call for this example, Prep Grantee. At the top of the spreadsheet, I can also see that the reporting period is from October 1st, 2017 to September 30th, 2018, which is the current federal grant year. So this page has all of the grantee level measures of structure, cost, and support together in one place, and it can be used as a reference of these measures prior to the opening of the Performance Measures Management System in August of 2018. Each of the blue boxes covers a different measure that Mindy discussed earlier. We'll start with what's listed on the left side of the screen and work our way down. The first box asks the grantee to put in their total funding award, which would include any rollover funds. Let's say that each year, PREP grantee gets a $250,000 PREP grant, and the grantee has no rollover funds from previous years. So in this box, I will enter my total grantee award as $250,000. The next box asks me to list what percentage of my total award I spent on each of these 4 categories listed. Grantees should keep track of their costs separately and simply enter a number between 0 and 100 in each of the 4 boxes. Note that these categories should not add up to more than 100%. If I attempt to enter numbers that add up to more than 100%, I get an error message that reminds me that the percentages cannot add up to more than 100%. So if PREP grantee allocated 70% of its funds to direct service provision, I would put a 70 here in this box. If I continued with this hypothetical example, I could maybe say that the grantee used 10% of its funds for grantee training, technical assistance, and monitoring, 10% for evaluation or research, and 10% for grantee administrative purposes. Note that if I had tried to enter the grantee administrative purposes accumulated to 20% of the funding, I would get an error message. I would need to adjust what I've entered. So the error message pops up and reminds me that the percentage of funding allegations should not add up to more than 100%. The next blue box involves entering the number of grantee staff and full-time equivalents that are involved in overseeing PREP. So, using Mindy's example from earlier, the grantee might have had 2 staff members that were involved in overseeing PREP, and each of them spent about half of their time on this responsibility, which would add up to 1 full-time equivalent. So I'll enter a 2 for total grantee staff and 1 for number of full-time equivalents. The remaining boxes ask about if the grantee or its designee conducts observations, trains program facilitators, or provides technical assistance. And if so, who provides each of these services? Note that these boxes only accept a yes or no as a response. If I try to enter something like a 2, I'll get an error message, as shown here, that says that the valid values are only yes or no. So let's say that this grantee or its designee, it did observe program delivery to monitor quality. They did conduct training of program facilitators, but they did not provide technical assistance to support programs. So I'd enter a yes for observations, yes for conducting training, and no for providing technical assistance. Now I'll jump down to the next box that says the types of organizations that conducted observations. Because I said up here that the grantee did observe program delivery to monitor quality, I need to identify who it was that conducted those observations. Maybe the grantee had both a technical assistance provider and an evaluation partner observe facilitators. So I'd mark a yes for each of those and a no for the others. So no for grantee, no for developer, yes for training or technical assistance partner, yes for evaluation partner, and no for program provider. Because I marked up here that the grantee did conduct training of program facilitators, I would also need to fill out the next box down here that asks about that. I'll skip that box in the interest of time. And because I said that the grantee did not provide technical assistance to support programs, I do not need to fill out this last box that asks who provided the technical assistance. If I enter that one of the groups listed did provide technical assistance to support programs, such as the developer, a message appears that says that because I entered yes for at least one of these items, my answer to the question above that asks if the grantee provided technical assistance to support programs should be a yes rather than a no. So if I enter yes, then the message at the bottom goes away. So if I scroll back up to the top and then turn to the right side of the spreadsheet, I see a box where the grantee can list all of their providers. If PREP grantee has 3 providers that implement PREP programming with youth, then I'll list the names of each of those 3 providers here. So let's say in this example, I have provider A, provider B, and provider C. So I'll enter those there. This can be helpful to note in one place, as grantees will need to collect and submit measures of structure, cost, and support from each provider. Providers do not need to enter any information into this spreadsheet, as this workbook is only the grantee level measures. So that's the entirety of the grantee level spreadsheet. Note that grantees will need to enter and submit all of this data into the performance measures management system itself, but this tool can be a useful way to record and keep all of this information together in one place prior to data submission through the system. So I'll now turn to the other structure, cost, and support tool, which has measures at the provider and program level. So let me pull that up now. So you'll notice that the first tab of this workbook is also an instructions tab. It provides an overview of the workbook and provides instructions for how to enter data. Note that a separate copy of this tool should be used for each provider. A grantee may choose to have their own copy of the workbook for each provider that they have and enter the data into it themselves, or they may choose to have each provider complete their own version of the workbook. Let's turn to the Provider Level Measures tab, which I'll select at the bottom of the workbook. Because each provider should have their own workbook, the first thing I'll do is note for which provider am I entering data into this workbook. So I've already listed that the name of the grantee is Prep Grantee, and we'll say that this is the workbook for Provider A. So I'll mark that here. So the Provider Level Measures tab has 3 large boxes with related measures inside each box. The first box covers provider information for the current reporting period. In this section, the provider should enter the PREP award amount, or their PREP subaward, as well as the amount of non-PREP funding received to support PREP programming. So let's say that Provider A received $50,000 from PREP grantee to implement programming, but also received $25,000 from other sources to support PREP programming. So I'll enter in $50,000 to the first row and $25,000 to the second row. Whoops, not $250,000. The provider should also indicate with a yes or no response if they were new for this reporting period and if they served youth during the reporting period. So we'll say that Provider A was not new, but they did serve youth during the reporting period. So I'll mark no and yes. The remaining questions in this box ask about the number of facilitators. The first 2 questions ask generally about program facilitators working for the provider and the number trained in delivering core program models. The second set of questions then ask specifically about facilitators providing PREP programming. Providers should note how many PREP facilitators were trained in delivering the core program model, how many were observed for quality monitoring exactly once, and how many were observed for quality monitoring twice or more. I'll skip over entering data into this box for the interest of time. The next box down here asks about implementation challenges. The provider should mark an X in one of the 3 boxes, not a problem, somewhat a problem, or a serious problem, for each challenge listed. So let's say that for Provider A, recruiting youth was not a problem, keeping youth engaged in program sessions was somewhat of a problem, getting youth to attend regularly was a serious problem, and so on. Whoops. The provider would continue through this list of challenges so that every challenge is assessed as not a problem, somewhat a problem, or a serious problem. If I then scroll down to the third box, it's very similar to the last, but instead lists types of technical assistance that the provider needs. For each possible technical assistance item, the provider should mark if they are not interested, somewhat interested, or very interested in receiving technical assistance. That would follow the same pattern of marking an X in the appropriate box as shown above. This box also allows providers to enter additional topics for which they're interested in receiving technical assistance. So maybe a provider is interested in learning how to select an appropriate curriculum for their youth. They could write in selecting a curriculum, curriculum, and they could mark that they're very interested in that. Note that it'll show up on the right to help me distinguish between which items were already listed and which ones I added myself. So that's the entirety of the Provider Level Measures tab. So we'll now turn to the Program Level Measures tab by selecting it here at the bottom. At the top of the spreadsheet, I'll see that the grantee and provider named carried over from the last page. I then need to identify which program models Provider A implemented. You'll notice that on the left of the screen, we have a long list of program models included that many providers use as their core adolescent pregnancy prevention curriculum. We also have two spaces at the bottom of the list where providers can enter any programs that they offer that are not listed in the spreadsheet. So I scroll back to the top. Let's say that Provider A implemented two programs, Be Proud, Be Responsible, and Becoming a Responsible Teen. The first thing I'll do is find Be Proud, Be Responsible, and Becoming a Responsible Teen on the list, and mark an X in the first column for each of those to indicate that the program model was implemented by the provider. So Be Proud, Be Responsible is here, so I'll mark an X there. Becoming a Responsible Teen is on a couple rows down, and I will mark there. You'll note that as soon as I mark the X, the entire row will highlight green, and that'll help me keep track of which row I'm talking about as I make my way across the spreadsheet. So let's continue entering data for Be Proud, Be Responsible, which is the green row listed on top. So the next thing I need to do is note how many hours of intended program delivery the program involved. So let's say that the program that used Be Proud, Be Responsible as its core program model was intended to last a total of 12 hours. So I'll enter that information here in this second column. I now need to identify what the target populations for Providers A's implementation of Be Proud, Be Responsible were. Let's say that the provider specifically targeted youth in foster care and homeless or runaway youth. So I'll mark an X for those two populations, which are the first two columns listed here. And you can see that the remaining target populations are listed in the spreadsheet. If I scroll to the right, each of the 6 adulthood preparation subjects is listed, followed by a follow-up question of how the subject is taught. So let's say that for the program that used Be Proud, Be Responsible as its core model, Provider A did include healthy relationships as one of its APS topics. So in this box here, I will mark an X to indicate that content on healthy relationships was included. Because I indicated that teaching about healthy relationships was included as a part of the program, I now need to mark all applicable sources of content with an X. We'll say that the instruction on healthy relationships was included in the program's evidence-based adolescent pregnancy prevention curriculum, so I'll mark an X for that in the first column here. I know it can be hard to read from this angle, but these are the 4 sources that Mindy discussed earlier as possible content sources. I'll also note that I'm not familiar with the content of Be Proud, Be Responsible, so this is in no way an endorsement that curriculum includes healthy relationships content. This is just a hypothetical example. So if I continue along the spreadsheet, the next APS listed is adolescent development, and let's say that the program did not cover adolescent development, so I'll skip over that one and not include an X. So then the next APS is financial literacy, and we'll say that it did cover financial literacy, so I'll add an X there. And then I need to identify how that content was taught. So let's say that the program included financial literacy content by including selected lessons from another existing curriculum, as well as some original content that the provider created. So I'll mark an X for both of those, which are the 3rd and 4th columns listed. We'll also say that the program included lessons on parent-child communication, which was covered by incorporating an entirely additional existing curriculum as part of the program, which is the 2nd column. I can then continue along with the remaining adulthood preparation subjects, but I'll skip that for the interest of time. I also need to go back and indicate the intended program hours, target populations, and APS for the second curriculum, Becoming a Responsible Teen, but I'll skip that in the interest of time. All right, I'll now jump back to the slideshow. All right, I'll let it load for 1 second. All right, so that is an overview of the tools. To sum everything up, the optional Excel-based data recording tools are available and can be used to track, record, and summarize the measures of structure, cost, and support. There are 2 tools, one for grantee level measures and one for program and provider level measures. Remember that if grantees choose to use the optional Excel tools, they would only need to complete one grantee level measures workbook, but each provider would need their own provider and program level workbook. You can download these tools at www.prepeval.com, and technical assistance for using the tools is available through our help desk. I'll now turn it back over to Laura to help us facilitate any questions. Feel free to continue submitting questions through the Q&A feature, or if you have questions that are more specific to your particular programs, always feel welcome to reach out to us at the help desk.
Thanks, Kevin. We have a handful of questions about the tools, and then there are some other questions that have come in about the measures themselves. I will begin with the ones about the tools. First, if the grantee is the provider, do they still need to fill out both the grantee tab and the provider tab?
Yes, if the grantee is the provider, they would fill out the grantee spreadsheet, and they would also fill out the provider and program level spreadsheet. And in that case, the grantee name and the provider name would be the same. But yes, you would just continue exactly as I described earlier, but you'd fill out both of those spreadsheets.
Another question about provider name. Do we want individual schools listed or teachers within schools who are delivering?
That's a great question, and probably depends on the setup of the grant. It seems likely that it wouldn't be specific teachers, but would rather be either schools or potentially if you have a partner organization that comes into schools, the partner organization could be the provider as well. So in probably no case would you actually insert a teacher's name themselves as a provider, but you might insert the school or the school district or maybe another implementation partner that works in a school setting.
And another question about in situations where the grantee is the provider, how would they answer the question about is the provider new? So
if if they are a first-time grantee, then the provider would be new for as far as the PrEP program. If the grantee is an existing grantee and they've been implementing programs as a provider, they would not be a new provider.
Thanks. Those were the only questions I see that were specific to the tools, so we're now going to circle back and answer some of the other questions regarding the measures. This one is about the questions on who provided training, and in this organization both developed the model and facilitates the lessons. So they're wondering whether they should check both grantee and developer on the question about who provided training.
Yeah, that's a good question, and our guidance is to think about either the primary role that the grantee is playing and select that, or you can also select all that apply, because you are able to select all that apply, and we want to capture sort of all of the roles that the organizations are playing. So you could select that the grantee and the developer sort of as one in the same provided the training. That would be perfectly okay, because you can select all that apply.
A couple of other questions regarding the tools have come in, and so I'm going to answer those or ask those. First, one just wanting to confirm that these Excel tools are optional.
Yes, the Excel tools are optional. If you have other means of collecting and tracking this data, please feel free to continue using those, but they have been created to help and simplify grantees that would find them useful.
And a question asking when they should begin using the data recording tools.
And that's a good question. It can definitely depend On the grantee, remember that this submission will be in August of 2018, and so these tools can be helpful to track providers over time and that information. But one of the key benefits of the tool is having an easy access to seeing all of these measures in one place prior to the system opening. So that can be helpful to kind of look at whether you enter data or not prior to that August 2018 submission.
And we, in general, post the tools at the very beginning of the reporting of the data collection period. For this year, because the approval was delayed, the tools are just now up, or I guess were available as of last month. So they're certainly up and ready to use, and it's up to you whether you want to begin using them right now or whether you want to wait and enter info into them a little later, or, as we said, not use the tools at all because you have other systems and ways of tracking them. All right. We have a question about whether each site needs to have report information entered separately or whether they can be aggregated. And I'm gonna take this one, I think, because the key here is the definition of site. If you're in a situation where there is one provider, so it's one organization that is delivering all of the activity, all of the programming, and they simply do it at different locations, then the structure and cost and support information at the provider level measures should be aggregated across all of those locations. The program level measures would be aggregated by program, but across the different sites. If, on the other hand, site in this question is a situation where a grantee has two different locations, each of which is a separate provider, so say there are two different sub-awardee organizations that are providing, one in some schools and one in a after-school program or a CBO location, something like that, then those two sites would be different providers, and so they would enter information separately and not aggregated together. We've got a couple of new questions that have come in, so I'm trying to read them really quickly. So one about tools for the participant, so the measures that have not yet been approved on participant experiences and so forth, asking whether tools for those will be available soon. Unfortunately, until the measures are approved, we can't really create the tools. We wouldn't want to put out tools based on measures that turn out not to be exactly what the final measures are and potentially cause confusion there. So as soon as those measures are approved, we will be creating tools and other guidance documents to share with everyone. All right. We have a couple of questions asking whether this webinar is recorded, and the answer to that is yes. At the very end, we will put up some information on how you can access it, but the simple answer is that the same way you joined the webinar today, you'll be able to, I think at least by tomorrow, the webinar should be up there and available for listening. And the tools are already up on the PrepEval website, as well as some other documents. All right, going back to a few of the questions that came in earlier about the measures, we have one just clarifying the timing, the reporting period, confirming that attendance, reach, and dosage is for programming starting after January 1st, but that the structure, cost, and support is for the entire year of funding, and that is exactly right. I read the question pretty much exactly as asked, and that's exactly right. Mindy, do you want to add anything else? There were actually a couple of other questions that came in just asking us to clarify again reporting periods. Would you want to go over that and maybe pull up that timeline slide one more time?
Yeah, let me go to the timeline slide. That's a good idea. Okay, so for the measures of structure, cost, and support, just to review again, those measures will capture information for the current federal grant year, October 2017 through September 2018. The measures will be reported in August 2018, but again, our hope is that grantees have all of that information already available to them to provide information through, based on that full year through September 2018, but can be reported in August. And then for the measures of attendance, reach, and dosage, those the measures that get submitted in August 2018 will be based on cohorts that start and end starting with January 1st. And so we provided guidance to start collecting information about cohorts that started as of January 1st through July 31st. And that information will be also reported in August 2018.
Thank you, Mindy. There's a question of whether there is a new guidance document with all of the measures and deadlines available. The PrepEval website, which we will put the link to up at the end of this, has an assortment of guidance documents, including an overview of the structure support measures, an overview of the attendance reach dosage measures, an FAQ document for each of those two types of measures, a summary of changes document that might be helpful for grantees that have been receiving grants for a while, and so you're used to the old measures and you don't need to go through everything, but you just want to see what's changed. There's a document on that. And those documents do highlight the timing and the reporting periods. So certainly I encourage everyone to look at what's up on the guidance website, and if there are any questions after that, of course, email us and we'll be happy to reply. We have a question that I'm going to direct to Jessica. Again, this is about the measures based on entry and exit surveys, asking if there is any anticipated timeline. Specifically, do we think that those measures will be ready before next fall? Jessica, are you available to take that question?
I am. So at this point, there is no anticipated timeline. It's still pending review and approval. We would like to have it ready for you this fall. However, at this time, we can't confirm that.
Thank you,
Entry
Jessica.
notice off.
We have a follow-up, I believe, to the earlier question about entering data for different sites. This one asks if there is one provider delivering two different program models and also at different sites. Would they aggregate by program model across sites? So yes, if you have sites nested within program model, nested within provider, then program model level data would all aggregate against the sites for that program model, and provider level data would aggregate across all program models and sites under that provider. Let's see, we have a few more questions here. We have one asking about some customization of these tools to combine into one spreadsheet. That is, we had the previous version of these spreadsheets, there were two versions that went with the earlier measures, and in restructuring them for this round, we actually were trying to make it easier for some grantees and providers that were not both grantees and providers, and so a lot of the provider level, in fact, all of the provider level measures are now in a separate spreadsheet from the grantee level. However, it's possible, if you would reach out to us individually, there may be some possibilities that we could help you figure out how to combine them.
Yeah, there's a lot of functionality behind the spreadsheets as far as, conditioning things and all that. So to kind of help keep the file sizes as low as possible, that's another reason for having separate spreadsheets. But as Laura mentioned, if you do have specific requests, feel free to reach out to us at the help desk and we'll see if we can accommodate those.
All right. We have another question about intended number of hours. Mindy, this one's for you, I suppose. Is it per session or a combination of all sessions? So example, if there's, 8 days and, 3 hours a day, would they combine those across all sessions?
Yes, you want to think about the total number of hours that are intended to complete one full delivery of the full model. So if you have a youth or a group of youth who are receiving that program, the total number of hours across all of the sessions that they receive to complete the program.
Thanks. And continuing with a couple more questions for Mindy, there is some clarification about training, a couple of things about training. First, if the grantee provided training, but during a previous reporting period, would it be counted here?
You would want to report the training that occurs within the specific federal grant year. So for this upcoming reporting period, if the training already happened, then you would not report that for the October 2017 through September 2018 federal grant year.
And a question clarifying what overseeing prep means. Would this, I think that the language may have been changed subtly from the previous version, which said administrating prep. Our intention is still the same. These are staff that are overseeing, managing, administrating the prep programs. Definitely intended to be distinct from staff that are directly delivering program to youth. Hopefully that answers that question. But Mindy, if you had anything to add.
No, just to note that when we're using the language of administering or managing or overseeing, that's all kind of similar language, just for the grantee level staff, exactly as you said, who are overseeing the management of the prep grant.
One participant asks, what is the biggest difference between this round and the last fiscal year? And I think maybe if we can put up slide 31, was it 31, the summary of changes slide?
Yep, I can pull it.
Great. This slide sort of hits the high notes. These are the biggest changes between the previous round and the revised measures of structure, cost, and program support. As I mentioned earlier, on the PrepEval website, there is a document that summarizes key changes, both of the structure, cost, and support, as well as the attendance reach dosage measures. So that is another good place to look there. And, sorry, reading a couple more. Another question about whether this webinar will be available to listen to. All right. There are a few other questions, I think, that are perhaps specific to individuals or individual sites, or seem to be repeats that I think we covered in another version of the question. When we're down to our last approximately 5 minutes, so I wanted to give Mindy an opportunity. Was there anything else that you wanted to add?
No, I just want to thank everybody for participating today and for all of your great questions, and hope you all have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you. And I did just get one more question that just came in. I'm asking whether the webinar from December is still available. And yes, that should also still be available. If anyone is having trouble getting to those webinars, certainly send an email. But actually now let's move on to our last few slides, which will point you to where to find these things. So a recording of today's event, as I said, will be available on demand approximately 1 day after the webinar. and can be accessed using the same link that you used today. Sorry, I'm trying to pull this slide up. There we go. Okay, perfect. And there's instructions here to download the slide deck and materials from the resource list, as was mentioned at the beginning. The Excel files and other guidance documents that we mentioned are available on the Prep Eval website. So please, everyone, feel free to look at the documents there. Hopefully they will answer a lot of questions that you might have that linger. And as well, please do reach out to Prep Performance Measures at mathematica-mpr.com with any specific questions that you would like our assistance with. I want to thank you all for taking the time to participate in this webinar today. And Jessica, did you have any closing remarks?
Hi. I would just like to say thank you again for joining the webinar and listening in. And again, as Laura mentioned, if you have any questions, just please email MPR and follow up, and we'll try to respond to those as soon as possible. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. That concludes the webinar.